November 1942. The steppes near Stalingrad were covered with the first snow, and in the secret offices of the Kremlin, a plan was being born that would turn the tide of the greatest war in human history. While German soldiers stormed the last blocks of the ruined city, Soviet generals prepared a counterblow of unprecedented force. The operation was codenamed Uranus, in honor of the most powerful planet in the solar system. And this power would soon fall upon the enemy with crushing force. In a few November days, the fate of 300,000 German soldiers would be decided. A classic encirclement operation about which textbooks on military art would write for decades. But for now, no one knew about it. Neither Paulus in his headquarters, nor Hitler in distant Berlin. The Soviet command kept its cards close, preparing to deliver a blow that would forever change the balance of power on the Eastern Front. By October 1942, General Paulus's Sixth Army found itself trapped by its own success. German troops controlled 90% of Stalingrad, but every captured block turned into a bloody mess of street fighting. Wehrmacht soldiers stormed factory workshops and residential buildings, losing men for every floor, for every room. Paulus thought about taking the city, not noticing how his army was stretched along a 600-kilometer front. The left flank was covered by the 3rd Romanian Army, the right by the 4th Romanian. Between them yawned a huge gap, which the Germans considered reliably protected by natural obstacles. But Soviet scouts saw a completely different picture. Colonel Novobrantsev of the Reconnaissance Department of the Stalingrad Front daily received reports on the weakness of Germany's allied forces. Romanian units were poorly armed, demoralized, and stretched over excessively wide sectors. One Romanian regiment held defenses on a 20-kilometer front, with a norm of 3 to 4 kilometers. They lacked anti-tank weapons, artillery, and even ammunition. Soviet aerial reconnaissance recorded how Romanian soldiers abandoned positions at the first signs of Red Army activity. At the headquarters of the Don Front, General Rokossovsky studied maps and understood. The Germans had created ideal conditions for a classic encirclement. Their strike group was bogged down in urban battles, their flanks stretched and weakly defended. All that remained was to strike at the right time and in the right place. The time was approaching with each passing day. On September 13, 1942, 3 men gathered in Stalin's office, holding the fate of the war in their hands. Georgy Zhukov, just arrived from Stalingrad, spread maps with red markings on the table. Alexander Vasilevsky, chief of the General Staff, silently studied intelligence reports. And Joseph Stalin walked around the office, pondering a daring plan he had just heard. Zhukov spoke calmly, but his words sounded like a death sentence for the German army. A classic encirclement, a double envelopment, a strike on the flanks followed by a closing in the depth of the enemy's defense. All as in military art textbooks, but the scale of the operation was astounding. 300,000 German soldiers were to be trapped. Vasilevsky supplemented the picture with figures and facts. 3 fronts, 1 million fighters, thousands of tanks and guns, coordination of actions over hundreds of kilometers, the precision of a Swiss watch in conditions where the slightest mistake would lead to catastrophe. Stalin stopped at the map and long studied the positions of the Romanian armies. Here, on these stretched flanks, the outcome of the entire campaign would be decided. A strike north of Stalingrad by the forces of the Southwestern Front, a strike south of the city by the forces of the Stalingrad Front, and between them, the Don Front, which was to tie down German reserves and prevent them from helping their allies. The operation was codenamed Uranus, not by chance. This planet was considered a symbol of surprise and destructive power. This was the kind of strike the Soviet generals were preparing. Unexpected, devastating, irreversible. But the main condition for success was absolute secrecy. Not a single German scout was to know about the impending operation. While the Uranus plan was being conceived in the Kremlin, Soviet intelligence officers methodically studied every kilometer of the German defenses. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. The enemy had made a fatal mistake. By stretching the Sixth Army across an enormous front, the German command was forced to entrust the protection of its flanks to its allies. The 3rd and 4th Romanian armies took up positions north and south of Stalingrad, becoming the weakest link in the entire German grouping. Lieutenant Colonel Pyotr Lyadov, from the Reconnaissance Department of the Southwestern Front, received reports from his agents in the enemy's rear every night. The picture that emerged was dismal for the Romanians, but encouraging for the Red Army. Romanian divisions were stretched across sections 15 to 20 kilometers each, whereas normal defensive density required no more than 5 kilometers per division. They suffered from a catastrophic shortage of anti-tank guns, only a few outdated cannons per kilometer of front. Soviet tanks could break through such a defense in a matter of hours. The morale of Romanian soldiers was at a critically low level. Many of them had been forcibly mobilized and dreamt only of returning home. Officers complained in letters about poor supplies, a lack of winter uniforms, and the complete absence of support from the German command. The Germans treated their allies as cannon fodder, making no secret of their contempt. General Vatutin, commander of the Southwestern Front, personally studied every intelligence report. His experienced eye immediately identified the key points for the future breakthrough. The Romanian positions in the Serafimovic and Kletskaya areas presented an ideal target for tank corps. Here, the defense was particularly weak, and the terrain allowed for rapid development of success in depth. A similar picture was observed on the southern flank of the German grouping. The 4th Romanian Army of General Constantinescu held the defense in the Abganyarovo and Tundutovo areas. These positions were also stretched and weakly fortified. Soviet planners understood it would be enough to simultaneously break through the defense in the north and south for the entire German front to collapse like a house of cards. But the most important discovery of intelligence concerned German reserves. Paulus kept all his best divisions in Stalingrad itself, where they were bogged down in endless street battles. In case of a flank breakthrough, he had practically no mobile units left. Several tank and motorized divisions were scattered across a huge front and could not quickly concentrate to repel the attack. The Soviet command received an accurate map of the enemy's weaknesses. Now, it only remained to strike with maximum force precisely at those points where the German defense was most vulnerable. The Romanian positions became the key to victory in the greatest encirclement operation in the history of the war. October 1942 transformed into a month of secret movements and hidden maneuvers. Endless columns of Soviet troops moved along nocturnal roads towards Stalingrad. Tank corps were redeployed from other sectors of the front under the cover of darkness. Artillery regiments occupied camouflaged positions in ravines and gullies. Rifle divisions concentrated in starting areas for the offensive. The scale of the regrouping was astounding. 1 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of guns and mortars. But German intelligence noticed nothing suspicious. The Soviet command turned camouflage into a true art. All movements occurred only during the hours of darkness. During the day, troops hid in forests, ravines, and settlements. Radio communication was minimized. Orders were transmitted only through liaison officers. Even division commanders did not know the overall plan of the operation until the last moment. General Vatutin personally supervised the concentration of the strike group of the Southwestern Front. General Butkov's 1st Tank Corps secretly took up positions in the Serafimovic area. Colonel Rodin's 26th Tank Corps was located near Kletskaya. General Romanenko's 5th Tank Army was preparing to deliver the main blow against Romanian positions. Each formation received a strictly defined offensive sector and specific tasks. On the southern flank, General Yeremenko carried out similar work. General Volsky's 4th Mechanized Corps and Colonel Tanashishin's 13th Tank Corps took up initial positions for breaking through the 4th Romanian Army. Soviet sappers worked all night creating crossings over the Volga, across which reserves and ammunition were transferred to the Stalingrad area. German aviation periodically bombed the crossings, but could not completely disrupt the supply of Soviet troops. Special attention was paid to artillery preparation. The Soviet command concentrated an unprecedented number of guns in the breakthrough sectors. In the sector of the southwestern front alone, over 3,000 barrels of various calibers were deployed. Artillerymen meticulously zeroed in on targets, compiled fire damage plans, and prepared for the most powerful cannonade in the history of the war. The secrecy of the operation was ensured by the strictest measures. All documents were classified as top secret and kept in safes. Officers signed non-disclosure agreements regarding military secrets. Even the word offensive was forbidden in negotiations and documents. Code names were used instead. The result of this titanic work exceeded all expectations. By mid-November, a 1 million-strong group of Soviet troops was concentrated near Stalingrad, but the German command continued to believe that the Red Army was capable only of local counterattacks. Paulus continued to storm the last quarters of the city, unaware of the approaching storm. The success of Operation Uranus depended not only on the precision of planning and the secrecy of preparation, but also on the people who were to bring this audacious plan to life. The Supreme High Command entrusted the leadership of the operation to 3 outstanding military leaders, each of whom had already proven themselves in the toughest battles. Lieutenant General Nikolai Vatutin was given command of the southwestern front and the task of delivering the main blow from the north. This 42-year-old Ukrainian was to break through the defenses of the 3rd Romanian Army and rush into a deep raid towards the Don. Vatutin was known as a master of maneuver operations, capable of lightning-fast concentration of tank formations at the right point of the front. His tank corps were to cover more than 100 kilometers behind enemy lines and reach the Don crossings in the Kalach area. Lieutenant General Konstantin Rokossovsky commanded the Don front and received a special task. His troops were to tie down the main forces of Paulus's 6th Army in the Stalingrad area, preventing the Germans from transferring reserves to repel attacks on the flanks. Rokossovsky, of Polish origin, who had gone through Stalin's camps and was rehabilitated on the eve of the war, understood the full responsibility of the moment. The slightest coordination error could jeopardize the entire operation. Colonel General Andrei Eremenko headed the Stalingrad front and was responsible for the southern part of the pincers. His strike group was to break through the 4th Romanian Army and move to meet Vatutin's troops. Eremenko, an experienced old-school cavalryman, perfectly understood the importance of the pace of the offensive. His mechanized corps were to act with maximum speed, giving the enemy no time to organize defenses. But even such talented commanders needed coordination of their actions. The Stavka sent 2 of its best representatives to the troops. Georgy Zhukov oversaw the actions of the southwestern and Don fronts, and Alexander Vasilevsky coordinated the operations of the Stalingrad and Don fronts. These 2 military leaders had the right to issue orders on behalf of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief and could change the operation plans at a critical moment. Each commander received extremely clear tasks, but at the same time retained freedom in choosing the methods of their execution. The triumvirate of Vatutin, Rokossovsky, and Eremenko, under the leadership of Zhukov and Vasilevsky, was to demonstrate to the world a new face of Soviet military art. 7:30 a.m. on November 19, 1942. The frosty air of the Don steppes was torn by thousands of fiery flashes. 3,000 Soviet guns simultaneously opened fire on the positions of the 3rd Romanian Army. The earth trembled from an unprecedented cannonade, and the sky was painted red by the glow of explosions. Operation Uranus had begun. Romanian soldiers in the trenches north of Stalingrad could not believe what was happening. An artillery barrage of such power surpassed everything they had seen in the long months of war. Shells exploded with the frequency of machine gun bursts, turning the frontline positions into a lunar landscape. Communication with command was cut off in the first minutes of the shelling. Officers lost control of their units. 80 minutes later, the roar of the guns subsided, and in the ensuing silence, a new sound was heard: the clanking of Soviet tank tracks. General Vatutin gave the order to advance. General Romanenko's 5th Tank Army moved into attack on a wide front from Serafimovich to Kletskaya. General Chistyakov's 21st Army advanced to the right, securing the flank of the tankmen. The first echelon consisted of rifle divisions, which were to create breaches in the enemy's defenses. Behind them came the tank corps, the main striking force of the operation. General Butkov's 1st Tank Corps broke through the defenses in the Serafimovich area by noon. Romanian units could not withstand the massive strike and began to retreat, leaving their positions virtually without resistance. Colonel Rodin's 26th Tank Corps achieved similar success near Kletskaya. By the evening of November 19th, Soviet tanks had advanced up to 30 kilometers, tearing the enemy's front into pieces. But the main thing was ahead. The tank corps received orders to develop the offensive in a southerly direction, towards the Don River crossings. Their target was located 100 kilometers from the breakthrough line, the city of Kalak-on-Don, a key node of German communications. The northern pincer of Operation Uranus began its deadly movement towards the heart of the German grouping. On November 20th, 1942, as dawn painted the snow-covered steppes near Stalingrad, General Yeremenko gave the long-awaited order. The Stalingrad front was going on the offensive. The southern pincers of Operation Uranus began their deadly movement towards Vatutin's tanks. The artillery barrage struck the positions of the 4th Romanian Army of General Constantinescu with the same devastating force that their comrades in the north had experienced the day before. 2,000 guns turned the Romanian trenches into a hell of fire and metal. The 57th Army of General Tolbukin and the 64th Army of General Shumilov moved to attack immediately after the artillery preparation. Behind them came mechanized formations, the 4th Mechanized Corps of General Volsky and the 13th Tank Corps of Colonel Tanashishin. The Romanian defense collapsed even faster than in the north. Demoralized soldiers abandoned their positions at the first appearance of Soviet tanks. Entire battalions surrendered without firing a single shot. By noon on November 20th, the southern grouping had advanced 20 kilometers deep, tearing through the enemy front like paper. At the headquarters of the 6th Army in Golubinsky, General Paulus finally understood the scale of the impending catastrophe. Reports from the flanks painted a picture of the complete collapse of the Allied forces. The Romanian armies ceased to exist as an organized force. Soviet tank wedges rushed into deep breakthroughs, threatening to encircle the entire German grouping near Stalingrad. The Chief of Staff of the 6th Army, General Schmidt, frantically studied maps, trying to find reserves to plug the huge gaps in the front. But there were no reserves. All combat-ready divisions were bogged down in the street fighting of Stalingrad and could not be quickly transferred to threatened directions. Panic gripped German headquarters at all levels. Communication with Army Group B was interrupted. Orders contradicted each other, and commanders on the ground lost control of their troops. The Soviet pincers relentlessly tightened, and it was already impossible to stop them. November 21, 1942, became the day when time transformed into the most merciless factor of the war. In the Don steppes, a dramatic race between life and death unfolded for 300,000 German soldiers. Soviet tank wedges from the north and south rushed towards each other, and between them, a panicked German grouping, trying to avoid inevitable encirclement, darted about. The city of Kalak-on-Don became a magnet, drawing steel avalanches from both sides. Here, at the ancient Don crossings, the fate of the greatest encirclement operation in military history was to be decided. Colonel Rodin's 26th Tank Corps sped towards Kalak from the north, overcoming the last kilometers of enemy territory. General Volsky's 4th Mechanized Corps approached from the south, sweeping away the remnants of Romanian resistance. The distance between them shrank with each hour, but the German command feverishly tried to organize a counterattack. Chaos reigned at the headquarters of the 6th Army. General Paulus received contradictory orders from Berlin and from Army Group B. Hitler demanded that Stalingrad be held at all costs, while Field Marshal Weichs insisted on an immediate withdrawal of troops. But time for maneuver was already running out. Soviet tanks were tearing towards the crossings over the Don, and only a miracle or a catastrophic error by the Soviet command could stop them. Neither happened. The Red Army acted with the precision of clockwork, and the German war machine, for the first time in years of war, suffered a serious malfunction. Kalak-on-Don awaited its liberators, and they were already very close. In these decisive hours, every minute of delay could cost the lives of thousands of soldiers, and every correct decision brought a historic victory closer. The commanders of the Soviet Tank Corps understood that not only the fate of the Battle of Stalingrad, but also the entire further course of the war was being decided now. The ring had to close, and close precisely here, at the walls of the ancient Don city. The 23rd of November, 1942, will forever go down in history as the day when the fate of 330,000 German soldiers was decided by a single radio message. At 14:30 Moscow time, the commander of the 26th Tank Corps, Colonel Rodin, broadcast the long-awaited words, "Mission accomplished. We have linked up with the 4th Mechanized." In the area of the farmstead Sovetski and the city of Kalak-on-Don, the advanced units of the northern and southern strike groups met. The encirclement ring closed. Tank crews from both corps embraced and wept with joy, understanding the magnitude of what had transpired. In 4 days of continuous fighting, they had covered more than 100 kilometers through enemy territory and accomplished a task that seemed impossible. Now, between the encircled German group and the outside world lay a steel wall of Soviet tanks and infantry. General Volsky, commander of the 4th Mechanized Corps, personally met with Colonel Rodin on the outskirts of Kalach. These two men became symbols of the triumph of Soviet military art. In a few hours, their formations transformed a powerful German army into an isolated group without supplies or communication with the rear. Not only the main forces of Paulus's 6th Army were encircled, but also a significant part of Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, the Romanian 20th Army Corps, and many auxiliary units. The total number of encircled troops amounted to 330,000 men, the largest encirclement in the military history of mankind. Soviet signalmen immediately transmitted the joyful news to Moscow. In the Kremlin, upon receiving the report of the ring closing, Stalin allowed himself a rare smile. Zhukov and Vasilevsky exchanged a firm handshake. Operation Uranus was crowned with complete success. But this was only the first part of a grand plan. Now, it was necessary to hold the created ring and methodically destroy the trapped enemy. The German command did not yet realize the scale of the catastrophe, but the fate of the encircled troops was already sealed. November 24th, 1942, inside the steel ring of the Soviet encirclement, utter chaos reigned. 330,000 German soldiers found themselves trapped in a cauldron covering an area of 1,500 square kilometers, stretching from Stalingrad to the Don. At the headquarters of the 6th Army in Golubinsky, General Paulus bent over a map, trying to grasp the scale of the catastrophe. The red arrows, drawn by staff officers, showed the position of Soviet troops. The ring had closed tightly and securely. Chief of Staff General Schmidt nervously smoked one cigarette after another, studying reports from the front. The picture that emerged was grim. Communication with the outside world was severed, supplies had ceased, and Soviet units were methodically tightening the ring from all sides. In the first hours after the encirclement, German troops tried to break through in different directions simultaneously. Individual regiments and battalions threw themselves at Soviet positions without coordination or support, hoping to punch a hole in the ring. But the Red Army was prepared for such attempts. Soviet commanders had anticipated the most likely directions of breakthrough and concentrated anti-tank artillery and reserves there. Every attack by the encircled forces was broken against a steel wall of defense, leaving hundreds of dead and wounded on the snow. Ammunition in the cauldron was dwindling at a catastrophic rate. German artillerymen received orders to conserve shells, firing only at the most important targets. Tank crews complained about a shortage of fuel. Many vehicles were already standing motionless, having turned into static firing points. And most importantly, food in the cauldron was running out. Quartermaster depots were designed for a few days of fighting, but now the army was cut off from supply bases for an indefinite period. Paulus understood. Without an immediate breakthrough, his troops were doomed to slow annihilation. On the evening of November 24th, he sent a radiogram to the Führer's headquarters, requesting permission to retreat westward. The response from Berlin shocked even seasoned generals. Hitler categorically forbade any attempts at a breakthrough and ordered them to hold their positions at all costs. The fate of 300,000 soldiers was decided by one insane order. On December 12, 1942, in the snow-covered steppes south of Kotelnikovo, the last attempt to save Paulus's encircled army near Stalingrad began. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of Germany's most talented commanders, received a seemingly impossible task from Hitler: to break through the Soviet ring and re-establish contact with the Sixth Army. The operation was romantically named Winter Storm. But behind this poetic name lay a desperate attempt to prevent a military catastrophe. Manstein concentrated all available reserves under his command: the 12th Panzer Division, transferred from France, the 23rd Panzer Division from the Caucasus, and the 6th Panzer Division from Army Group Center. These formations formed the strike corps of the new Army Group Dawn, created specifically for the relief strike. The German tank crews understood that the fate of 300,000 comrades trapped in the Stalingrad cauldron depended on their success. But the Soviet command was not going to give up its prey without a fight. The Stavka had anticipated the possibility of a relief strike and prepared appropriate countermeasures. Fresh reserves, transferred from deep within the country, stood in the path of Manstein's group. An operation began that was to become the last hope of the encircled German troops. The failure of Operation Winter Storm was the final act of the tragedy that unfolded in the Don Steppes. On December 23, 1942, Manstein's last German tanks stopped 48 kilometers from the encirclement ring. There was no further road. Soviet reserves stood as an insurmountable wall on the way to Stalingrad. 300,000 of Paulus's soldiers were left alone with their fate. But the consequences of Operation Uranus extended far beyond the snow-covered fields near Stalingrad. In Berlin, Bucharest, Budapest, and Rome, politicians frantically revised their plans. For the first time in the war, Germany had lost an entire army, and this fact could not be hidden from the Reich's allies. Marshal Antonescu in Bucharest received reports of the complete defeat of Romanian troops near Stalingrad. The Third and Fourth Armies ceased to exist as an organized force. Tens of thousands of Romanian soldiers died or were captured in a few days in November. Antonescu understood. His country had paid too high a price for its alliance with Germany. In Budapest, Regent Horthy convened emergency government meetings. Hungarian divisions on the Don also suffered heavy losses, and Soviet troops were already preparing new strikes against the positions of Germany's allies. Mussolini in Rome received alarming reports from his representative at Hitler's headquarters. The Italian Eighth Army on the Don was hanging by a thread, and its defeat was a matter of time. For the first time in the war, Germany's allies began to doubt the Reich's ability to win the war. The Red Army demonstrated a level of planning and coordination that forced a re-evaluation of all previous notions about Soviet capabilities. Operation Uranus was not just a military victory. It marked the beginning of the strategic collapse of the entire German coalition. The initiative on the Eastern Front passed to the Soviet Union forever. 70 years after the completion of Operation Uranus, military academies around the world continue to study this masterpiece of operational art. At West Point and St. Cyr, at Sandhurst and the General Staff Military Academy, cadets dissect each stage of the Soviet offensive, trying to understand the secret of such brilliant success. What turned the operation near Stalingrad into a classic example of military planning? The first lesson concerned intelligence. The Soviet command spent months studying the enemy, identifying critical weaknesses in the German defenses. Every kilometer of Romanian positions was mapped with the precision of individual machine gun nests. The intelligence network worked flawlessly, providing data on the morale of Germany's allied troops, their armaments, and command plans. Without this painstaking work by intelligence officers, no operation would have been possible. The second principle is absolute secrecy of preparation. 1 million soldiers, thousands of tanks and guns were concentrated right under the enemy's nose. But the German command noticed nothing suspicious. Soviet generals turned camouflage into a high art, using night marches, radio silence, and disinformation. Even their own commanders did not know the overall plan until the last moment. The third lesson is the correct choice of main attack directions. The Stavka unerringly identified the weakest sections of the enemy's defense and concentrated maximum forces there. Strikes against Romanian positions north and south of Stalingrad ensured a rapid breakthrough with minimal losses. The fourth principle is clear coordination between fronts. 3 commanders acted as a single organism, synchronizing their strikes with hourly precision. Stavka representatives, Zhukov and Vasilevsky, ensured uninterrupted communication between headquarters, adjusting plans in real time. The fifth lesson concerned the use of mobile formations. Soviet tank corps acted with unprecedented audacity, covering hundreds of kilometers behind enemy lines and closing the encirclement ring in a matter of days. Their commanders showed initiative and decisiveness, not giving the enemy time to organize countermeasures. Operation Uranus proved that modern warfare requires not only the courage of soldiers, but also a scientific approach to planning, impeccable organization, and the creative thinking of commanders. When the last defenders of Stalingrad laid down their arms in January 1943, few understood that they were witnessing not just a military victory, but a revolution in the art of war. Operation Uranus laid the foundations of the modern theory of deep operation, the principles of which are still studied in military academies from America to China. The concentration of forces in decisive directions became the cornerstone of all subsequent military doctrines. Soviet planners proved that it is better to have overwhelming superiority in a narrow sector than to evenly distribute forces along the entire front. This principle formed the basis of NATO's air-land battle doctrine of the 1980s and still defines the planning of major military operations. The interaction of various branches of service at Stalingrad became a model to emulate. Artillery, aviation, tanks, and infantry acted as a single organism, complementing and reinforcing each other. Modern concepts of network-centric warfare and multi-domain operations directly trace their origins to the experience of the Soviet fronts. Reconnaissance and camouflage gained a new dimension. The ability to conceal a million-strong grouping from enemy intelligence seemed like fantasy. But the Soviet command turned it into reality. Today, Militaries of all countries study the methods of information warfare and deception of the enemy, established in Operation Uranus. Coordination of actions over vast distances became possible, thanks to a clear command and control system. Stavka representatives Zhukov and Vasilevsky created a model that later formed the basis of modern battlefield management systems. The speed of decision-making and the flexibility of planning at Stalingrad forever changed perceptions of the capabilities of operational art. Modern military conflicts confirm the relevance of these lessons again and again.